From St. Louis Public Radio, this is Politically Speaking.
The next Missouri legislative session is less than a month away, and with the new year comes a new class of both representatives and senators bringing their own priorities and goals. On this episode of Politically Speaking, State Representative and soon-to-be State Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman joins the show to talk about what her priorities are going into session this year. We also discuss how she feels Republicans fared in the general election and what the party might accomplish this session. Let's hit the music.
This is the Politically Speaking podcast, the definitive show about Missouri politics.
We have to talk about things that matter to people.
I've tried to bring that same aggressive iconoclast style with me to the United States Senate.
I think my district is a model for the state.
We put Missourians first.
You just kind of have to find the common ground with people.
I believe that this district deserves someone who represents their values.
After I came back to St. Louis, I started thinking that I could have a bigger role on the change that I wanted to make.
Hello and welcome to Politically Speaking. I'm your host, State House and Politics reporter Sarah Kellogg. Joining me is my co-host. He is the political correspondent for St. Louis Public Radio,
Jason Rosenbaum.
And joining us today in studio, we're all in the same room today. It's really exciting.
Hey.
She is the Republican state representative for the 97th district and is soon to be state senator for the 22nd district,
Mary Elizabeth Coleman.
Welcome back to the show. Kind of for our listeners, remind us kind of where your district is right now and as well as who you will be representing as a senator.
Sure. So I currently represent the 97th district in a format that has completely gone away, but I represent parts of South St. Louis County and northern Jefferson County. And as the senator-elect for the state, for the 22nd senatorial district, I'll be representing most of northern Jefferson County. So Elaine Gannon has 4 or 5 other counties, and then just the very southern part of the county. But most of Jeffco I'll be representing, and I'm replacing Senator Paul Wieland, who's term limited.
So I guess kind of my first one is, why did you decide to run for state senate?
Yeah, so, I think that Paul Wieland he's been a friend of mine for many years. He actually was the first person that I called when I decided to run for state rep. And when he was term limited, he brought a viewpoint and a way of approaching things that I really admire and I like. And when I looked at the other people that were talking about running, I was worried that that worldview wouldn't be well represented. And so, sometimes people think that you should wait your turn, quote unquote. I still had 4 years that I could have served in the House of Representatives. But because of term limits, those seats become open only every 8 years, usually. And I can't imagine primarying a sitting Republican. And so if I wanted to continue to serve and ever to serve in the state Senate, really realistically, it meant, well, let's try for this. And, if it didn't work out, then it would have been an honor to have served in the House and my time would have been done. But looking forward to kind of heading over to the other side.
Yeah, you didn't have any kind of desire to maybe wait until another term limit? You kind of wanted to kind of serve consecutively? Or?
I think it's hard to run if you have a 4-year gap also. I think that, your name ID goes pretty quickly. There was a lot of money that was spent in my first primary and then in my first general election to the state rep seat. And so, you're not kind of in the news. People aren't talking about you anymore. It's just easier, I think, if you're gonna try to go to the Senate, to go from having just served in the House.
What are going to be some of your priorities when you're sworn in January?
So I think as Republicans, one of the things that's frustrating for me is we don't always articulate why the policies we're advancing are going to help, just normal people. When I'm going for a walk in the evening with Chris, or if I'm running into people at Walmart or see people at my kid's school, Republican policies often seem to be packaged as kind of bombastic and not necessarily focused on the day-to-day governance. And so I'm really focused on things that'll help Missouri working families, in particular Jefferson County. So there's a package of reforms that I filed around education reform, around our safety net reform. I think that we need to make sure that the help is going directly to citizens who need it and that we're not kind of wasting taxpayer dollars, that people have a path to independence, that they're not stuck in a system. And then also just making life easier, right? Everything is more expensive right now. I'm continuing some tax reform policy that I started in the House, trying to make sure that things that aren't really luxuries are not taxed like that. So getting rid of the grocery sales tax, the state's portion, and then also getting rid of, sometimes people call it the pink tax, on diapers and feminine hygiene products.
And we'll get into those specifics a little bit later in the show. But do you think, you'll have a better chance at meeting those priorities, in the Senate as opposed to staying in the House? An example I think of is, Senator Holly Rader, who for years had legislation that she wanted to get through in the House, and she finally did her first term in the Senate. And so I'm curious if that's do you think you're going to have a better shot at these?
Well,
bills?
there's only 34 senators instead of 162 state reps. So certainly immediately that creates more opportunity for you to be able to move things that are important to you. But also Missouri's really fortunate, I think, that we have one of the last few standing filibusters. And so that procedural move, along with some other ways that the Senate operates, like, for example, every senator gets to file 3 priority bills and name them. And before any other bill gets filed, it goes through the list in seniority. So I'm representing the 22nd district, or I will, but I also have the 22nd number of seniority for the Republicans. There's 24 Republicans in the state Senate. And so my bills are much higher numbered, and that kind of the way that those get referred to committee, it just means things move faster.
So does that mean Ben Brown is like 34th because he's never been elected to anything before?
He and Senator-elect Jill Carter, their numbers, I forgot, they drew, and then Rusty Black and Nick Schroer and Curtis Trent, they all had to draw also because they all had the same number of years of service in the House.
Oh.
So the way the new senators rank in order, I don't know for Jill and Ben, but it goes, and then Tracy, because we have a majority, she'll be last.
Oh, okay.
State Representative Tracy McCreary, who just got elected to the
because
state
she
Senate.
has like 10 years of House experience because of a strange
9, yeah. She came in on a special election, almost 10.
Almost 10. But you're coming into the Senate at a time where there's been a lot of infighting within the Republican caucus. Like, do you have any concerns that that's going to continue once you're sworn in?
I'm a mom of many, and I think so sometimes I look at things through that lens, and sometimes you have a bad class, not bad kids, but the chemistry of that class is kind of off. And I think that that's what we saw the last 2 years in particular. This incoming freshman class, we know each other, we really like each other. State Representative McCreary and I agree on almost no policy. Don't make any mistake about that. But personally, we like and respect each other. And she's an honest broker, and I think she would say the same thing about me. And so when you have that level of trust or relationship, you're able to build from that. And certainly the other Republicans that are coming in know and like each other, too.
What do you make of the decision to dissolve the conservative caucus? Because I think when you and especially Representative, soon-to-be Senator Schroer, were running, there was like, well, are they going to be part of the conservative caucus? Are they going to be part of the what's the non-conservative caucus called?
It depends on who you talk to. There's, derisive terms for either subgroup. And
I've normally said like Republican leadership and then like conservative caucus.
I don't want to call them the normal caucus because that would be saying the conservative caucus is abnormal.
Yeah.
But like, what I mean.
Yeah, no. So listen, we should have one caucus of Republicans, and I think that that's really important. When you look at the people who won the primaries across the state, by and large, the most conservative Republican won in all, I think actually in every single case, even in open primaries. And so we are going to be more conservative by nature because of the people who won those seats. But I also think that our style is a little bit different. And one of the things that people talk about is in the Senate, it makes sense to me to join in and try to bring 20 votes with you in the House because now you're a voting bloc that people have to really contend with. But in the state Senate, one senator has a real ability to affect outcome and legislative goals. And so I don't see giving up the representation for my district or, I don't know. I'm pleased to see that we're back to one caucus.
Yeah. And do you have faith kind of in the new leadership and helping with those? In addition to the new class coming in, do you feel like the divide will be less visible this coming year?
Well, I mean, the truth is I don't really see that there was much of a policy divide even in the last 2 years. I think it was mostly personality-based. And because we have a different mix of personalities, you're going to see that play out.
What about on redistricting, though? That was a palpable policy divide.
But that was not necessarily along who is the most conservative or who is. So sometimes these labels just break down and what ways people wanted to work out. You had some people who were, wanting primarily looking at the bases needing to be together. And you had some people. So everybody even had their own interests even within that fight.
Yeah, but people who were not for a 7-to-1 map were called rhinos. So I feel like that's kind of rewriting history a little bit.
Well, okay, so maybe I will say outside of the redistricting, and that was one fight in particular that I was not really involved in because my primary opponent, Representative Dan Shaw, was the one who was leading the effort for the 6-2 map. And so there was no real reason for me to weigh in on that. I preferred a 7-1. But I think labels aren't particularly helpful for people who are trying to get things done. And my style has always been to try to focus on where are the points of agreement and let's try to move things forward.
I kind of want to move on to election takeaways. So kind of how do you feel Republicans fared this past election in the state of Missouri?
Well, it's the first time, I think, Jason, you might know this. Is it 100 years that we've had Republicans in every statewide office? Maybe ever?
Maybe ever. I mean, in the 1920s, there was a time when Republicans were winning everything, but it's been a long time.
It's been a long time. So that's a huge win. And I think that Governor Parson has to get credit for that as the head of the ticket, that we have all statewide wins. That's phenomenal. Basically, in the Senate, it's been a wash. That seat, the 24th senatorial seat, was the only real competitive race in the state. And that wasn't one that was a Republican seat. The last cycle, I think it was John Lamping who held it the last time that a Republican did. And so it's been a while since Republicans held that seat. So by and large, I've been really happy with the election results. Now, you're going to follow-up question and ask me about the state house and what happened there. We did lose, how many? 3 seats? Most of that seems to me to be a result of the redistricting process more than anything else. And when you looked at, we made 10 swing seats and Republicans picked up 7. Only in such a super minority state would that be seen as a good win, right? So by having 10 more swing seats and us winning 7 of the 10, that's about right for the percentage that Democrats are doing across the state.
And I asked this to Representative Weber, Emily Weber. I mean, I think the Democrats have a lot to be proud of in the fact that they won in like Boone County and Jackson County, but they didn't make any gains in Jeffco. They didn't make any gains in St. Charles. They didn't make any gains in Buchanan or Cass County.
Well, in Boone County, for example, our outgoing state rep in that seat that she's so excited about picking up had said some problematic things to this, been pretty aggressive, and the tone was a little bit difficult. And so a lot of times you see candidate selection matters a heck of a lot. And so they had really strong candidates in some of those places. And I think that where you saw those 3 pickups, I don't know, I'm just not that worried about it.
Yeah, do you imagine, in addition to kind of making, with those Democratic gains, there are just more competitive seats, more competitive races with this new map. So do you imagine kind of for the next couple election cycles really having these competitive races where both parties really need to bring strong candidates to win?
I do think that you see candidate selection matter more than ever when you have more competitive seats. And if you look at the state house in particular, the strongest representatives, I think, have come from swing districts. So those purple districts tend to send stronger representatives than either party's safe seats. But not really, because also you've got now incumbencies. So now we've got 7 of those 10. I think it's harder to knock off an incumbent than it is an open seat.
How do you think that overturning Roe versus Wade had an effect on state legislative elections?
Yeah, I just don't think that you and I talked a lot about this in advance of the 2020 election. And Missouri really didn't have access to abortion long before the Dobbs decision was decided. In fact, about 18 months. We were ahead of even Texas losing access to abortion. And so I don't think that it had the key role. Now, certainly, in the statewide elections, maybe if you look at the margin in some of our suburban areas, you're going to see maybe women had a higher uptick. But I haven't checked out those numbers to see whether there was higher participation rates because by and large, I think it was a pretty high turnout election everywhere.
Well, like when you were campaigning in Jefferson County, and that was right around the time Roe was overturned.
Yeah.
Like, what were voters telling you about
Awesome.
that?
Congratulations. This is amazing. Tears in their eyes, welcoming me at the grocery store. When I say truly, there is no more impactful legislation that I'll have ever worked on than as one of the architects of the heartbeat bill. It is the thing I will forever be the most proud of because of the lives that have been saved and the dignity that has been brought. And so, it's interesting to see the hand-wringing that is done in the media about the decision as a disconnect between those in my district who are beyond thrilled, have been literally praying for 50 years for this result.
When we'll talk more about that, especially as it relates to the initiative petition process later in the show.
Do you feel like there are any other policies that might have caused more people to go to the polls? I know Amendment 3 was kind of thrown out there, a lot of the legalizing adult use of marijuana. Do you think
that was
caused
such
more
a
people to
strange.
come out?
I've been wanting to talk to you guys about that campaign in
Well,
particular,
here
because
you
I
go.
have never seen Tashara Jones and the Catholic Church and Eben Thampy all on the same side of something. It was like such an interesting cross section of people who were fighting against it. But by and large, when you read the language, people wanted legalization. I should have looked these things up, but before to see what percentage passed in Jeffco.
I think Jeffco approved it.
We did, but I don't know what the margin was.
It was not a lot, but it goes to like with.
Yeah, it won in Jeffco. It won in, I think, 11 counties.
Yeah, and that's the question, is whether or not, a lot of times when you think about like marijuana legislation, I know, for example, Ron Hicks was the sponsor of it when the state house, but had a lot of Democratic support. You think that it's a Democratic issue, but is this at this point, seeing it pass, do you think this is just a bipartisan supported policy?
I think it's demographics too. I mean, everybody in this room is under 40, right? And you kind of look at, or I guess I'm probably the oldest at 40, but I don't think that people's politics play into whether they think it should be legalized or not at a certain age demographic. And that the legislature couldn't get to a point that we agreed on is why we had this result. I voted against Amendment 3. I thought it was terribly written, and it creates some real problems from an administration standpoint. But people are done with not being able to legalize when you can go into all these other states that do.
Do you think that there could be added things that the legislature needs to do now that it's legal? For example, after Thursday, if I went to Illinois and brought back 3 ounces of marijuana, it would be totally legal. But, it could still be legal for my employer to fire me for having 3 ounces of marijuana. And I understand people may not be comfortable with having that much marijuana, but it's literally in the Constitution that I can have that. And I don't know why I would get disciplined in my job because of that. What do you think about that?
So one of the things that you saw the Chamber of Commerce really pressing back in the last 2 years in regards to COVID policy was where is the line about what employers are allowed to regulate because their licensing or insurance requirements prevent it, and what is a right that people have as employers or employees to be able to live their life unfettered. And so I hear what you're saying, but I have a hard time imagining something passing that would erode an employer's rights because of the bonding and the insurance, as well as the federal contracts where it's still illegal. We're kind of in this no man's land, even though we're the 20-whatever state to legalize this.
We need to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with State Representative Mary Elizabeth Coleman. And we're back on Politically Speaking. I'm Sarah Kellogg. Joining me is my co-host, St. Louis Public Radio's Jason Rosenbaum. And our guest this week is Republican Representative Mary Elizabeth Coleman, who represents the 97th District, which covers parts of St. Louis and Jefferson County. But in the new year, she will be the state senator for District 22. So I want to get into the upcoming session. It is less than a month away. The marathon's about to begin, which is exciting, but also very overwhelming. With redistricting not taking up oxygen this year, do you believe that will free up more time this session for Republicans to accomplish goals?
Well, there's always something that's going to jam up the process. So I don't know what that thing is going to be yet. But, the only thing that stays the same is that there's some big thing that no one can agree on that's going to take air out of the room. So I'm not sure what that's going to be. I will say the tone seems to be different this year. The conversation seems to be in more agreement, certainly at Senate caucus meeting. There seemed to be broad agreement about where we should be starting on things. I'm hearing from the new majority floor leader in the House, John Patterson from Kansas City, and the Speaker-elect, Dean Plocher. There's agreement from the House on what policies. And so I think we're going to see some good movement. But something will stop it. I just don't know what it'll be yet.
So when I was talking with incoming Senate Majority Leader Cindy O'Loughlin, and I asked her, what are going to be the big issues? Unprompted, she said initiative petition overhaul was going to be a top priority. First of all, do you agree with that? And if so, what exactly about the initiative petition process would you like to see changed?
So what I would like to see changed versus what the caucus wants to be seen, I don't know about the details of where everybody's at. So initiative petition is, I'm sure your listeners are really sophisticated, so they know, but it's the process by which the people, and really usually it's big donors because it takes about $2 million to pass something on the ballot, gather signatures and have language put on the ballot. And then they can have either a statute change like what we pass in the legislature and General Assembly, or it's constitutional amendments. And so what I have heard broad support for and what I support is looking at constitutional amendment changes, increasing the threshold of voters either geographically or by percentage or maybe even both. Our Constitution is really crazy big. And I was in the Senate Secretary's office last week, and she has framed an original copy on the wall. It belongs to that office, the original Constitution. And guys, it's like 9 pages. And that feels more appropriate to me than the book that we have now. It seems like every time we do any change, we put it in the Constitution. I don't have any problem with initiative petition for statutory changes as it's written. I think that's fine if people want to write an amendment. It is really, or change the statutes. It's really hard to pass a law. People are kind of flippant about it. But if the legislature doesn't like what's there, and somebody wants to take a run at changing what the people put on the ballot and take the political cost of that, then I think that's fine. They should be able to do it. But I do worry about our Constitution being so unwieldy.
Now, before I ask this question, I just want to note that there has been talk about doing what you're doing for years, and there have been efforts that have passed the House, but not the Senate. So this is not a new issue.
Has it ever passed the Senate, though?
No.
I don't think so.
It has never passed the Senate, which is usually where it goes to die. But do you think that there could be more emphasis on this issue because there's open talk amongst people that do not like the 2019 abortion ban wanting to put a constitutional amendment on the ballot to repeal it? Do you think that's one of the driving forces behind people like you who probably want to preserve that?
Yeah, I actually am skeptical about whether something would be put on the ballot about abortion, and here's why. Because Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers voluntarily left the state long before Dobbs did because they decided it would be cheaper and easier to just pass something or not worry about it and put abortion clinics on the border or these mobile clinics. So Missouri did not have access before the Dobbs decision, and there was a business decision that was made by abortion providers not to continue operating in the state. I also think that it's entirely likely that Missouri would reject such an initiative. It's a real gamble for them to put something like that on the Constitution and take a run at it when there's other states. There's a finite amount of resources. I think it's more likely that they would go to states like Michigan that were strongly pro-life states but have Democratic support that kind of crosses lines. So I'm really not that worried about that.
So let's ask a converse question, because right before the Dobbs decision, I was talking with you about a constitutional amendment that says there is no right to an abortion in the Constitution, which is something I'm assuming you would want put in there. But if you need 60%, isn't that going to be a lot harder to achieve?
Yeah, I also don't know. I mean, I think it's fine I think that if we had done that before the Dobbs decision, it would have been more helpful. At this point, I don't know that we need it because federal law supports our position and the state law supports our position.
A resolution I'm already, that I've seen filed would prohibit the Missouri Constitution from protecting the right to an abortion. So do you also kind of not see that as a proper avenue to kind of address this? Or I'm curious of your thoughts on that.
My position has been that our Constitution is pretty unwieldy and has a lot of things in it that don't necessarily need to be in it. This federal law is our Constitution, which allows under the 10th Amendment for states to be able to make their own laws. And we have laws on the book that protect the unborn. So at this point, I would rather not fiddle with the Constitution.
Do you think that let's just say you end up putting something on the ballot in August 2024 to make it harder to amend the Constitution? I'm just going to use that generally because we don't know what the substance is. Do you think that would pass? Because a similar plan failed pretty miserably in Arkansas, which is not exactly a socialist utopia.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I haven't seen any polling on that. I haven't seen any discussion on it. It is really the kind of discussion that only seems to happen in the Capitol building, and I haven't spoken with voters who are not super tied in. So I don't have an insight into whether that would pass or not. Also, though, I want to say, and I know you're trying to move on to the next question, but there's a budget that has to be available to educate voters. And so anybody who wants to pass an initiative petition, they really need $2 to $3 million. And so whether that campaign came up with the budget to be able to get the message to voters, I think has the biggest impact on whether something like that would pass.
So with the overturning of Roe versus Wade, do you feel like there's any further to go when it comes to anti-abortion policy in the legislature now that it is not, it's not something Missourians can get unless medical emergencies?
So I said this earlier, the thing that I'm the most proud of is that I am one of the architects of the Missouri Stands for the Unborn Act. I think it's the most impactful legislation that we could have on saving lives. And I just, at this point, because the Dobbs decision has come through, feel really confident that our laws are in a good spot, and I'm focused on trying to do other things that will help Missouri families and preserve them.
Kind of switching topics to gun control. So after the school shooting in St. Louis, multiple gun control bills have been filed, and are there any gun control measures that you would support?
No.
Why?
I think that our laws that are in place, what we see happening is we see people not following the laws that are on the books, and we see prosecutors who are unwilling to prosecute them. I don't support any further gun laws. I just don't.
I did see this Post-Dispatch article that would, and it's by Representative Lane Roberts, and it involves putting special prosecutors for the St. Louis Circuit Attorney's Office. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen that, but I'm really frustrated about prosecutors who are choosing to not follow the laws that are written. One of the things that is happening over and over again in multiple jurisdictions is people are refusing to prosecute the laws that are on the book. Agape Boarding School is one that I find particularly offensive. We have a Republican prosecutor who just won their reelection. They weren't even challenged. In many of our small counties, maybe you only have one lawyer who is a Republican, and so they continue to serve even though they're not prosecuting. Attorney General Eric Schmidt brought, I want to say it was 67 or 68 charges that they did an investigation into Agape. The local prosecutor filed very, very few and has slowly been dropping them off. So I have filed a bill that would allow a local law enforcement officer to petition a local judge to give the Attorney General jurisdiction if you have somebody who's not following the law.
Now, there is recourse if there's a feeling, especially among the Attorney General, that a prosecutor is not doing their job. It's called a quo warranto motion, where they could actually remove prosecutors. And if people think that this is unprecedented, it's not. Chris Koster tried to remove the Dent County prosecutor in 2009 because she wasn't doing her job properly. So would you want the Attorney General to start using that motion if it's pretty clear that a prosecutor is not doing their job correctly?
So unfortunately, Chris Koster wasn't successful in that action, and my understanding is that has not been particularly helpful. The idea of it I support, and I'm glad that there is a procedure, but I would like us to see another option because that has not been really successfully used, at least in the recent history.
My memory is fuzzy. I think she resigned before the motion went off, but
my memory also could be wrong on that, but we have this problem. It's a systemic problem. It's not one party versus the others elected. And so creating another opportunity for local law enforcement to petition the local judge to appoint another prosecutor seems like a good solution to me.
Another possible priority, we're talking initiative petition, I think sports betting. That's been, I know that now.
Speaking of things that are legal some places, but not here.
1,000%. And so, I know I think it was during special session that now President Pro Tem Caleb Rowden said it's embarrassing that the Missouri hasn't gotten it done yet. So do you see momentum kind of in that area that's here?
Yeah, a lot of people are saying we should get this done. It's silly that we haven't had it done yet. I don't know that necessarily sportsbook needs to be lumped in with video lottery terminals. Video lottery terminals will bring in far more revenue to the state. They're just a higher volume, and they already exist everywhere. So those are those machines that look like slot machines that you might have seen in a gas station. They're called gray machines because it's unclear whether they're allowed or not. It's not black or white. So, but I think that we've got to make sure that we have a path to get that done.
Yeah. Do you see better success if those are kind of split separately into separate bills as opposed to like one package like it was last year?
Senator Denny Hoskins has been working on this for about 9 years, so I would not give him advice about what the best way to pass something is.
So moving to your policy goals, as of this morning, I've done a little bit of a search, and you filed 9 bills. I said you talked about the priority legislation, which I didn't know about, so that's very interesting. One of those bills is your bill that eliminates the sales tax on food, so I know this is something that you've introduced before.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have worked on some tax reform policies in the House, and I'm continuing that work with both the sales tax on groceries as well as the sales tax on feminine hygiene products and diapers. We have a provision in our Constitution that says essential items shall not be taxed. But under Proposition C that was passed in the 90s, we have a 1% sales tax on grocery items. That funds a specific education fund. I find there are 26 states that have eliminated that. It's a bipartisan. Republican and Democrats have worked on this. I think it's, as costs are rising, we don't want to create a tax system that is a burden to the poor. And so I just think it's an important thing that we get rid of that sales tax on grocery items.
Yeah, this seems like it's has bipartisan support. And also, with inflation being so high, do you think this elevates the chances of at least getting hearings and being addressed this year?
I hope so. But also, it's one of the first 3 bills that I filed. And so it's going to be in that first batch of bills that's referred in the Senate, I would expect. And that alone increases the chance that it's going to be able to move faster.
Now, you mentioned before the show that one of your priorities is to change the way basically education funding works in the state. Can you just talk about that, and then I'll ask follow-up questions?
Yeah, so I think that the money that is allocated by the state, so the state share, not the local share, should follow the child, and that parents should have the freedom to decide what education their kids need. And so whether that's from one public school district to another public school district, whether that means to a private or parochial school, and it also creates a refundable tax credit for homeschooling families.
So how would this functionally work if I wanted to use this program?
Yeah, let's say I live in the city and
Yes.
I wanted to send my kid to the special school district.
Okay.
Okay, so what I would do then is I would so public to public is the most complicated, so I'm starting with that one because I don't think that we should force a school district to take in more kids if they don't have an availability. So let's say that the state mandated number is 22 kids in a classroom and that school district has only 17 kids in it, then they would publish, hey, we have an opening for 5 more kids. And if there's more than 5 kids that are wanting to enroll, they could create a lottery system so that the kid could go there. The new school district, the parent would just sign an affidavit, and DESE would reimburse the public school district that the kid is at rather than the home school for that child's education.
You mentioned special school district, which listeners know, but 2 of my sons actually take advantage of the special school district, and it's paid for by a property tax that's paid for by St. Louis County taxpayers. St. Louis City residents do not pay the special school district tax. So under your bill, would the state have to reimburse SSD for them to take advantage of those services?
So what they would do is they would send the same amount. So charter schools and based on how many free and reduced lunches, so they're called, and then also hold harmless schools, there's a different funding target for each of those kids. And what would happen is that the sending school district, whatever that share is that child would get, the receiving school district would get. And if there's a delta that needs to be made up, the parents would be responsible for that under my bill.
How realistic do you think it is going to be to pass this? Because not only are Democrats not going to like this, but you could have rural Republicans who typically don't like these types of ideas also come out against it.
Yeah, so I'm going to push back a little bit that Democrats don't like it. So there was a poll that came out I think last February that showed that this is basically a 70-30 issue across all party lines. It's about an 86% in favor issue of education freedom for Republicans, and I think the low point is 68% for Democrats. So that's a really popular idea across all lines. Parents, especially after COVID, are seeing what their kid is and isn't getting at their school districts, and most countries do this, right? So if you're receiving a benefit, the parent's able to decide what school their kid should be educated with, and that dollar amount will follow it. So I'm just going to push back that it's not a popular idea.
What are some of your other legislative policies that are focused on education this year that you're really hoping to get past the finish line?
So that's my big education push. I think redoing how we get money to the schools and that parents have the freedom to pick the right school for their kid is a pretty heavy lift. So that's the piece that I'm focusing the most on. My other legislative priorities, though, are looking at how we handle our safety net programs. We have created a system of dependency where if you receive, let's say, Section 8 benefits and TANF, which is often called food stamps, and a child care subsidy, and you work at a big box store, let's say you work at Walmart or Target, because of inflation, that base wage has gone up. And so now people are refusing hours because if you make $1 more, you could lose all of your benefits. And that's a really scary place for people to be. And so I'm looking at trying to make sure we have a pathway to independence, because it's not that first raise or the more hours today I'm worried about. It's the third raise or taking a bet on yourself and opening your own business. So I'd like people to have a pathway to independence. So I'm proposing that we have a stair step off of those programs so that people are able to kind of climb their way out of them.
You also have proposed a bill to remove the sales tax on feminine hygiene products. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So feminine hygiene products and diapers were paper products in the 60s and 70s for the first time. And at that point, in their infinite wisdom, somebody decided that we should tax those as a luxury item. I think most families would say that these are not luxury items, although there is a new movement to go back to cloth products and reusable products. So if you're a little crunchy. But anyways, these are not luxury items in almost everybody's minds. And certainly in my mind, they're everyday staples. And I don't think that we should be, as a state, funding essential services on the backs of essential items.
We are out of time, so thank you so much, Representative Coleman, for joining us on the show. Politically Speaking is a product of St. Louis Public Radio, which is a part of the University of Missouri-St. Louis. You can find all of our work on stlpr.org. Representative Coleman, soon to be Senator Coleman, where can people find you on the internet where you want to be found?
Yeah, so MaryElizabethColeman.com has links to all of my social media. If you want to interact with me, probably Instagram is the place that I am most active. That's a demographic thing.
As Twitter slowly dies, I think a lot of people are also jumping that ship to Instagram.
I'm reliving my youth by doing more video stuff, so I'm also more active on Instagram too. So.
All right, until next time, so long.